Heddiw, rwyf eisiau sôn ychydig am y murluniau canoloesol a cafodd ei darganfod ar welydd mewnol hen eglwys Sant Teilo. Wel, mae'r stori'n dechrau yn ôl yn nechrau'r 80au ganrif diwetha, pan gafodd hen eglwys Sant Teilo yn Llandeilo Tal-y-bont ei chynnig i Amgueddfa Werin Cymru i'w hail-godi yn Sain Ffagan. Roedd yr adeilad ei hun mewn lle reit anhysbell ar lan ar afon Llwchwr yng nghanol corstir. Ond nôl yn y canol oesoedd, roedd y lleoliad yn un eitha pwysig, a gwelir olion dau gastell Mwntebili yn aill ochr ar llall i'r afon ar bwys safle'r hen eglwys. Felly mae'n amlwg ei fod yn man strategol pwysig y bryd hynny, ac yn fan croesi'r afon hefyd fel y gwelir yn yr enw Llandeilo Tal-y-bont, sef man croesi neu pontio'r afon. Yn gynnar yn y broses o astudio'r safle, ddeithom ar draws garreg hynafol gyda chroes wedi'i gerfio ar un ochr. Mae'n bosib ei bod hi'n dyddio nôl i duar 7fed ganrif. Yn sicr, roedd hi'n dynodi man gysygredig Cresnogol cynnar ac un oedd yn gysylltiedig â theilo neu un o'i olynwyr. Dechreuwyd adeiladu yr eglwys presennol tua'r ddechrau'r 18fed ganrif fel eglwys Normanaidd, ond dros y canrifodd fe chwynegwyd ati. Yn gyntaf wrth adeiladu capel i'r ochr dde o'r gangell ac yna un arall i'r gogledd. Erbyn ail hanner y 15fed ganrif, yr oedd eil-deheuol wedi cael ei chwynegu at yr adeilad yn ogystal â ffordd. Felly erbyn tua 1530, roedd yr adeilad wedi datblygu i'w ffurf derfynol gan cynnwys sgrin cerfiedig rhwng corff yr eglwys ar gangell, llofft o grog uwch ben, a nifer o gerfiadau, a ffeintiadau ar y gwaith coed a'r welydd, sef y murluniau. Pan nath Harri'r 8fed torri a Rhufain ar ddechrau'r diwygiad Protestannaidd tua ddiwedd yr 1530au, gwelwyd cerfiadau, peintiadau a symboliaeth Catholig yn cael ei dinistrio, dileu neu ei cuddio. Yn achos y lluniau oedd ar y welydd, y ffordd gyflymaf oedd i'w peintio drostynt gyda chot o wyngalch. Bu'r eglwys yn gweithredu fel eglwys Anglicanaidd am dros 300 mlynedd, ac yn 1810 gosodwyd rhai ffenestri newydd yn y welydd, tra tu fewn ychwanegwyd corau pren i'r gynulleidfa a philpid newydd. Oherwydd ei leoliad anhysbell a ffrinder pobl i fynychu'r oedfaon, penderfynwyd cau'r eglwys yn yr 1860au. Ond yn dilyn pwysau oddi wrth cynrigolion ar yr ardal, cytunwyd i gynnal gwasanaethau yn yr hen eglwys tair gwaith y flwyddyn, ac mae'n y lun i gael sy'n dangos pobl yn croesi'r afon Llwchwr mewn cyryglau mwyn mynychu un o'r oedfaon yma tua'r flwyddyn 1910. Ond bod pobl yn dal i cynnal y chadw a gwyngalchu'r adeilad, dirywio gwnaeth yr eglwys, ac erbyn 1970 cymerwyd y penderfyniad i gau'r eglwys. Pan cynnigwyd yr adeilad i Sain Ffagan ar ddechrau'r 80au, roedd yn edrych yn drist iawn. Roedd rhywun wedi dwyn llechu'r to a chloch yr eglwys, ac roedd y corau ar dodrefn mewnol wedi diflannu. Tu'r un amser, a aelodau o'r Comisiwn Brenhinol yn Aberystwyth wrth nhw ymweld ar adeilad mwyn recordio'r eglwys, ac wrth wneud hyn, dyma nhw'n sylweddoli bod yna baint neu rhywbeth yn dod i'r golwg lle o'r darnau o wyngalch wedi disgyn oddi ar y welydd, a wnaeth wedi sylweddoli yn go fuan bod yna rhywbeth pwysig, hwyrach yn cuddiedig ar y welydd yma. Cyn datgymalu'r adeilad, roedd rhaid yn gyntaf i aelodau o uned Adeiladau Hanesyddol Amgueddfa Werin Cymru rhifo'r cerrig a mesur pob rhan o'r eglwys yn ofalus iawn.
Wel, Gerallt, wy'n clywed bod wedi bod yn jobyn anodd datgymalu'r murluniau hynod yma. a wedyn wrth gwrs ei ail-greu nhw o fewn yr eglwys. So, sio das hwnna?
Wel, dwi'n meddwl y beth cyntaf ni fod sylweddoli yw'r ffaith mae adeilad o garreg sydd gyda ni fan hyn. Dyma ni rhan o'r wal. A wrth gwrs, beth yn digwydd wedyn, wrth gwrs, yn gorfod gorchuddio'r wal gyda plaster, fel welwch chi fan hyn, a wedyn heinen arall o'r blaster. A oedd hwnnw wedyn yn ei drwy'n cael ei wyngalchu, ac ar ben hwnnw oedd yr amlinelliad o'r llun, y darlun, yn cael ei osod ac yn cael ei beintio yn llawn. Felly, mwyn achub y murluniau, oedd rhaid mynd am nôl fel petai, oedd rhaid tynnu, wel, os mynwch chi gyda'i gilydd, wrth gwrs, oedd yna wyngalch dros ben y murlun, ers rhai canrifodd yn ôl bob tebyg, oedd yr walydd yn cael ei gwyngalchu yn reit aml, pob pasg yn traddodiadol, felly gallwch chi dychmygu'r trwch o wyngalch oedd ar y walydd yma. Oedd rhaid crafu hwnnw i ffwrdd yn ofalus iawn mwyn mynd nôl i darganfod beth oedd yn guddiedig o dan y gwyngalch, a wedyn, wrth gwrs, oedd rhaid tynnu'r heinen i ffwrdd. Wel, mwyn achub y darn yma, oedd rhaid mewn ffordd tynnu'r plaster i hun oddi ar y wal, a dyna oedd yn creu'r trafferth y gweud y gwir.
Wel, pan wnaethoch chi ddatgymalu'r eglwys yma yn ei leoliad greiddiol a datgymalu'r murluniau, wy'n gwybod oedd cyfres o 7 murluniau gwahanol o gyfnodau gwahanol. Felly, sut wnaethoch chi benderfynu ar ddewis y murluniau'r cyfnod yma?
Wel, chi'n iawn, mi wnaethon ni darganfod pob mathau o gyfnodau o furluniau, o baint yn hytrach falle, sef darnau o ysgrif Cymraeg yn Saesneg, a fel o'n i'n mynd nôl trwy'r hynny, a ni'n mynd nôl mewn amser wrth gwrs, a nes bod ni'n dod ar draws pethau wedi cael ei sgwennu mewn Lladin. A daethon ni ar draws un heinen oedd i'w weld rhaid gwmpas yr eglwys i gweud y gwir, oedd yn dyddio o ran steil, o ran gwisg y bobl oedd wedi cael eu portreadu, i'r cyfnod dechrau'r 15. Ac oedd edrych ar rheina, sylweddoli bod gyda ni nifer o luniau yn ymwneud â'r beth yn galw'r pasiant, sef yr
bywyd Crist.
Bywyd Crist, croeshoeliad Crist yn ywedig. Ac oedd hwn wrth gwrs yn diddorol, ond dyma'r casgliad gorau oedd wedi cael ei darganfod unrhyw man yng Nghymru. So oedd rhywbeth arbennig iawn o byti hynny. Hefyd, rhaid cofio bod yr eglwys ei hun wedi bod yn datblygu dros y canrifodd o fod yn eglwys reit fechan i gweud y gwir, wedi wnaethon nhw ymestyn gyda capel i'r ochr gogleddol, capel arall i'r ochr deheuol, ymestyn hwnnw eto i creu eil yr ochr deheuol, ychwanegu porth i'r eglwys. Ond erbyn tua y flwyddyn 1520, 30, o'n i wedi cyrraedd beth welwch chi nawr mewn ffordd, sef oedd yr eglwys wedi datblygu i'r siap yma. Ac oedd wrth gwrs oedd y murluniau a'r adeilad yn cyfateb ar y pwynt yna, a penderfynon ni bydd hynny'n cyfnod gwych i ail-ddehongli yma yn Sain Ffagan. Cyn i ni ddechrau datgymalu'r welydd mewnol, roedd rhaid yn gyntaf tynnu'r plaster o ddiarnynt. Ond cyn dechrau'r hynny, oedd rhaid tynnu'r gwyngalch fesul heinen i weld os oedd yna rhyw liw, paint neu pigment yn cuddiedig oddi tano. Unwaith i ni lwyddo tynnu'r gwyngalch oddi ar y wal mwyn gweld maint y darlun, y tasg nesaf oedd ei orchuddio gyda defnydd tebyg i sach hesian a'i gludo gyda resin arbennig ar ben y murlun. Byddai hyn yn amddiffyn y darlun ar gyfer y cam nesaf, sef ei dynnu oddi ar y wal. Oherwydd natur anwastad y wal garreg, roedd yn rhaid defnyddio cain y morthwl mwyn rhyddhau'r plaster o'r cerrig. gwaith caled a llefurus. O'r diwedd, fydda'r panel yn dod yn rhydd o'r wal, ac mi fyddai'n cael ei drosglwyddo, wyneb i weired, a'r forden, cyn cael ei gludo'r labordy ym Mhrifysgol Caerdydd. Darganfuwyd rhyw 10 o wahanol furluniau o gwmpas yr eglwys. Yn y labordy, fydda'r resin yn cael ei doddi mwyn rhyddhau'r gorchudd hesian. Wedyn, bydde modd i'r arbenigwyr glanhau'r murlun gan trwsio darnau o baint a oedd wedi dod yn rhydd a llenwi unrhyw craciau. Roedd y lluniau gorffenedig yn drawiadol iawn. Dyma rhai ohonynt, i gyd yn dyddio nôl i ddechrau'r 11 ar 15. Dyma'r llun o Crist yn cael ei wawdio, rhan o'r gyfres o luniau sy'n adrodd hanes dioddefaint Crist gen y croeshoeliad. Mae'r llun nesaf, oedd y dan y gwawdio, yn dangos angel. Mae'n dal tarian, ac ar y tarian welir tair hoelen, eto symboliad o'r croeshoeliad. Dyma enghraifft arall. Y tro hwn y portreadu Crist wedi ei glymu a'i rhwymo, a gyda symbolau o'r croeshoeliad o'i gwmpas, fel yr ysgol a'r gwaywffon, ac uwch ei ben y geiriau mewn Lladin, ecce homo, welir dyn. Dyma un o'r lluniau gynharaf i ni ei ddarganfod, sef y Santes Catherine. Gyda'r olwyn greulon y tu ôl iddi a chafodd hi ei ffyndydio arni, sef tarddiad yr olwyn Catherine, y Catherine Wheel. Mae'n dyddio o'r 15fed ganrif. Un peth arall roedd yn rhaid i ni ei wneud oedd creu copi neu amlinelliad o bob darlun, fel y byddai'n bosib ei copio nôl ar y walydd. Llun arall oedd y Pieta, sef Crist yn dangos ei glwyfau. Dyma'r darn gwreiddiol, a dyma sut y gwnaethon ni ail-greu'r darlun gyfan. Uwch ben, gwelir arfbais Harri'r 8fed, rhywbeth prin iawn mewn eglwys o'r adeg yma. Cymerwyd y penderfyniad i ail-greu'r eglwys fel y fyddai wedi edrych tua'r flwyddyn 1530, hynny yw cyn i effeithiau'r diwygiad Protestanaeth cael ei teimlo. Wnaethon ni ail-adeiladu'r welydd trwy defnyddio'r un dulliau a deunyddiau a oedd yn gyffredin yn y canloesoedd, lle oedd darnau ar goll fel yn achos rhai'r ffenestri. Wnaeth ymysyniad creu copïau yn seiliedig ar darnau a darganfuwyd yn yr eglwys gwreiddiol.
This piece of stone is probably about 600 years old. So, you've looked at all the windows in the church, haven't you? Yeah, what do you think? That's the top of it. Well done, you. That's right, it's the top of it, isn't it? This piece of stone we found built into one of the windows that had been bricked up, you know. So we were grateful to them for leaving that piece of stone because we were able to copy this then, you see.
Ar un fath gyda throstio'r toion, lle bynnag bosib, wnaethon ni ail-ddefnyddio'r prenau gwreiddiol. Ond os nad oedd hyn yn bosib, wnaethon ni gwneud cyplau newydd allan o dderw. Roedd y canlyniad yn trawiadol. Roedd y sgrin gwreiddiol wedi diflannu, felly wnaethon ni wneud un newydd a'i gerfio a llaw. Cyn hir, fydd y Comisiwn Brenhinol yn lansio llyfr newydd sy'n edrych ar murluniau Cymreig dros y canrifodd. Llyfr fydd rwy'n siŵr yn cyfraniad pwysig a gwerthawr yn dealltwriaeth o'r maes arbennig hwn.
Hello, my name is Chris Catling. I'm the Secretary of the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales. I've come to Llancarfan, a beautiful little village and beautiful church in the Vale of Glamorgan, just west of Cardiff. This church features in our most recently published book, which is called Painted Temples, and which is all about the use of colour in the late medieval church, whether that take the form of wall paintings, or the painted statuary, or the painted woodwork of the roof and the rood screens. Anybody entering a late medieval church would not have seen the white painted sepulchres that we have today. They would have seen a riot of colour. Richard Suggett has written a brilliant book on the subject in which he's examined documentary evidence for the lives of the people who painted these churches. He's looked at interesting evidence for the craftspeople who built the woodwork, the timber screens, the roofs, and he asks questions about the overlap between secular buildings of the late medieval period and churches. It's a riveting book. I'll be talking to Richard later about his discoveries in the process of writing the book. But first I'm going to talk to Jane Rutherford, who is the paintings conservator who has uncovered the paintings in this remarkable church. Tell us a little bit about how you think the artist has heightened the drama of this encounter between St George and the dragon.
The tension here is really between the two beasts. With all due respect to George, who's up there doing his job, the drama, the tension between those two beasts' eyes is like nothing I have ever found in any other rendition of St George and the Dragon. And I've looked through stained glass, panel paintings, lots of wall paintings, not just in this country, but also abroad, as far abroad as Ethiopia. Nobody, colleagues, has produced me a picture of anything that compares with the drama of these two interacting beasts. The horse is such an integral part of the defeat of the dragon, and we have to remember this is not the killing of the dragon, this is the defeat of the dragon. And then after he has been subdued with the lance that comes through the back of his neck, and you can see the lance protruding on the window splay through the back of the dragon's neck and the blood coming down the window splay there. After the dragon has been subdued, St George then suggests to the princess that she takes her girdle and puts it round the dragon's neck, and she leads the dragon back into the town as meek as a little dog, to prove that he has been subdued. Then the critical part of the story, this is all bribery on George's part, because the king of the town, represented by the castle here, is asking George, you can have whatever you want, have the daughter of my hand in marriage, I'll give you anything. And all George asks for is that the townspeople convert to Christianity, and that the king and the townspeople build a church to the Virgin Mary, which he duly does, but he dedicates it not only to the Virgin, but also to St George. And then, only then, does George kill the dragon with his sword. And the Virgin's representation in the picture to the viewer's right, there, that is unique. She is included in this drama, blessing the combat scene. So two things. A, she's included in the drama, and B, she's blessing it. And as Sir Roy Strong, who's been here many times and is hugely excited by these paintings, and he said to me and Anne, when have you ever seen the Virgin blessing? It's not...
It's an almost Christ-like gesture.
It's God the Father and Christ bless. But here she is blessing the combat scene. St George is the Virgin's knight. He does her deeds for her. So he's persuaded the townsfolk to convert to Christianity. And the first figure ever to come out before the excitement of George was the princess, who is one of the ugliest princesses you will see in any rendition, in any medieval painting. But nevertheless, she is incredibly important because round her neck is a little cross. And round the neck of her mother, the queen, looking out from the battlements there, is a little cross. And this is the painter condensing so many different stages of the story into one scene, because that shows that they've converted to Christianity. So this is typical of the period. You've got this one space, and you use it. You tell all the different parts of the story. And when we started removing the lime wash in that area there, that was the place to start before we got onto the drama of George, because there the overlying layers of lime wash were cleaving away from the face of the painting by 2 centimetres. And it was really only because I could prove the damage that those overlying lime wash layers were doing to any potential painting underneath that we got the grant and the funding to remove them, because normally you don't get the money.
Was the overlying layers were pulling the medieval painting away from the wall?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it was, you needed to rescue
yes.
the medieval painting before it was lost forever.
Yeah, the weight of that overlying lime wash, and we took away anything between 2.5 and 3 tons in bucket loads at the end when it was put on a weighbridge. But as that overlying lime wash was removed, sometimes we could only go we couldn't go faster than a square centimetre an hour. That was fast in some places.
It is painstaking work.
Painstakingly slow, and you have to go down through each layer of lime wash to make sure there wasn't a later painting. Because if we had found a later painting, that would have been stop.
You have to stop and record
to save everything. You cannot remove a later painting because there may be something more precious underneath. So as soon as it was actually on day, let's call it day 1, it might have been day 2, but we'd been peeling away lime wash in that area because it was already cleaving away to such a degree it was the obvious place to start. And we found the princess with the cross round her throat, and so we immediately knew what the subject matter was, especially when we then found her father looking out over the battlements there. It could only be a rendition of St George and the Dragon. But that was the easy bit, that zone there. And then looking across this wall and the crest on George's helmet, and we were trying to work out, well, what is that? That's one heck of a crest, if that's the crest. And what we also couldn't tell was how much would survive. Because it may be that we'd only just found fragmentary little bits.
How disappointing it would be if that was all you'd got, was the top and everything else had gone.
Exactly.
But you've mentioned the crest there, which is quite extraordinary. How much of that armour is fantasy and how much of it is a reflection of the fashionable armour of its time?
Well, on that subject, I consulted the expert, Dr. Tobias Capel, and in fact, after we first broadcast what we'd found through Salon, your journal, he contacted me the very next morning and said, Jane, may I come and visit Llancarfan? This is so exciting. This is unique in Britain to have such a complete wall painting of this figure subject, of this sort of date. When he was here a few days later, he said on general stylistic grounds, he was giving it a 1420s, 1430s date. And then starting to look at the individual components of the armour and comparing their reptilian quality with the scales of the dragon, you get into the artist's mind here, how the artist is using this opportunity. And then we have the conundrum as to whether this artist is representing the armour of the day, or is it slightly later than the 1420s, 30s, and he's mixing elements of the armour of the then day with slightly antiquated armour. And the crest, as Toby pointed out, is quite antique, that particular fan crest. So Toby, with his breadth of knowledge, was immediately able to direct us to St Hilary, which is only a few miles from here, where there's an effigy of Sir Thomas Bassett of Beaupre, died 1423. 1423, and his armour is a direct comparison for this armour. So it could be a mixture of contemporary and slightly antiquated armour, which would be a well-known way of depicting a noble figure representing high chivalry.
He managed to depict this psychological drama without any incised lines or underdrawing to guide him. He must have been a man of great skill. Is that evident too in the adjacent paintings?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He may have been copying sketches, But by the time he was working on the wall, he knew exactly what he was putting and where he was going to put it. He'd obviously painted this subject matter before. There are no incised lines, no underdrawing. We'd have found it. We were going over this by the square millimetre. When it came to the flow of the subject matter, there you have the Virgin's Night, St. George, holier-than-thou figure. And you even have the Virgin included in that scene, as we've just discussed. Utterly extraordinary and apparently unique, iconographically. Just progressing on from that, you're taken to the 7 deadly sins in one of the most dramatic renditions of those you will see anywhere in the UK. He painted the 7 deadly sins and balanced them the 7 corporal works of mercy. 4 of those scenes you see on the opposite side of the window there, without any of the frames in place. The red frames were put in afterwards, and you can see where they overlap some of the details, like the dragon's snout below Avarice over there. There's a classic example of the red going in afterwards, and there are some on the castle round here. So he's balancing the holier-than-thou figure of St. George on one side of the door, with man as the epitome of evil on the other side of the south door, because there is a figure of a man lying on his back, and from the relevant part of that man's body stems the snake-like neck of each of the dragon's heads and open jaws that support each of the sins.
That's absolutely remarkable. What an imagination he must have had. So from the stomach comes the head that leads to gluttony. Is that right?
Yes.
And
yes.
what are the
Well,
other?
there's the obvious, the snake-like head going down from lust ends up in the obvious place.
Fascinating.
And you can follow others down, and you can tell it's a man in a short tunic lying on his back, and one hand survives. It is clasped round the neck of one of the dragon's heads. But alas, the rest of that figure was lost in the 1960s.
It's quite a sobering thought to realise that in the 1990s, the community almost walked away from this church because of the cost of repairing the roof. There was consideration given to declaring it redundant. A vote was taken in the village. People queued around the block to get in, and fortunately they decided to try and raise the funds to keep the church in community use. Their faith in the future of this church and their sterling fundraising efforts led to the discovery of the remarkable sequence of wall paintings that has made everybody realise what a significant church this now is. I'm going to talk to Gordon Kemp now, who is chair of the Llancarfan Society, to ask him what impact the wall paintings have had on the community here and their attitudes towards the church. You must be very proud of these paintings. They are of international significance. Has it made any difference to the local community?
I think it's made quite a significant difference because they attract, as you say, it's international significance. They attract many, many visitors to the church. So the church has an income from it. But I think that also has a knock-on effect to the rest of the village because, okay, we're a small community, but we've got a pub that has rooms. So the Fox and Hounds gets visitors who come, stay, spend money there. And there are some sort of bed and breakfasts and Airbnbs in the area as well. So yeah, it brings people in.
So it's benefiting the rural economy
of the
village and the surroundings.
Oh yes, yes.
And do people make contributions when they come here? Do you notice money being put in
the
collection box?
Certainly.
Good, because I understand that there are more paintings to be recovered at some stage,
well,
and you need some money to...
Well, there are more to be recovered, well, hopefully recovered, but as you say, yes, we need money to do that.
And are you going to start some sort of fundraising campaign?
Well, we're always looking to raise funds, and we're always looking to find some charity or other organisation that would contribute towards it. But it is very difficult. There's so many demands.
You had a National Lottery Heritage Fund grant. Would there be another grant forthcoming, do you think?
We would like to look at that if that's a possibility. Yes. But yeah, there are certainly, I think, quite significant other paintings to be discovered because probably when the paintings were commissioned and the painting was done, probably most of the church was covered. Do
you have any idea what the other themes might be?
I'll be honest, not not totally myself. I'm not an expert on this, and we sort of defer to people who know a lot more, but I think anything more would be fantastic.
That would be very exciting, wouldn't it?
Very, very so, yeah.
I'm now going to talk to Richard Suggett, my colleague, who wrote most of the Painted Temples book. He calls it his lockdown project because he began it just after the COVID lockdown of March 2020. I prefer to think of it as an unlocking project because what he's done is to reveal to everybody the rich heritage that we have, the rich faith heritage in Wales, and how many remarkable survivals we have from the pre-Reformation era when many other churches in the British Isles were destroyed by iconoclasts. Richard Suggett, congratulations on your wonderful new book. It's already a bestseller. You called it Painted Temples. It's an intriguing title. Would you like to tell us what the title suggests?
Right. Well, the title Painted Temples just came into my mind, but it does actually convey the idea that the interiors of the late medieval church were richly painted. But the contrast, is quite subtle, really. In the book, I talk about the evidence from Welsh poetry, and they always talk about the white exteriors of churches. And you have to imagine a sort of glowing, glistening, lime-washed jewel in the landscape, but white. And you open the door, and there's a burst of colour. And the colour is from the painted walls, the statues, the glass, and painted woodwork. So that's why I chose the title.
It must have been an astonishing sight for anybody walking into a church in the late Middle Ages. What do you think the purpose of the paintings was?
You have to think about this quite carefully, I think. The importance of churches like Llancarfan and like Llandeilo Tal-y-bont is that you can see how all the walls were covered in paintings. It's not just a sort of a little framed picture. The totality of the walls are covered, and into the window reveals as well. And it's rather like a wallpaper, I suppose, but more exactly like a tapestry. And so you have a lot of different images, but jostling each other, but they're sort of competing with each other for attention. And you might have, 30 paintings in a church. And the painter wanted to attract your attention. And he or she did it by putting lots of detail in the painting. So with St. George and Llancarfan, the armour, the horse are beautifully drawn. You get fish around the feet of St. Christopher, and you get lots of tools injuring the Sunday Christ. So once your attention had been hooked, you contemplated the painting, and contemplation was like a form of prayer.
That's interesting. So it's not so much that the priest is taking the congregation around the walls and using the paintings to stimulate a sermon, a lesson. You think it's more for the individual to contemplate the painting?
I think it is. I mean, there's obviously an element of instruction about all this, but it's about the engagement of people with the picture.
Yes.
And when you see a picture like the mocking of Christ in Llandeilo Tal-y-bont, with the mockers in profile, but Christ looking at you directly, it's a very challenging painting, and I think people were engaged with it.
And humour is used quite a bit as well, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
it is. Yeah,
the seven deadly sins is a wonderful opportunity to have fun with people's foibles.
Absolutely, another hook.
The drunkard, for example, on the walls of this church, in Llancarfan Church.
That's very good. And the Christ mockers are drawn with extraordinary knobbly noses and
evil faces,
evil but humorous, and caricatures really.
And the spittle that emerges from their mouth echoes the shape of the whip with which Christ was whipped during the scourging.
That's very subtle.
Yes,
indeed.
So you mentioned poetry there. One of the innovative aspects of your book is that you have actually researched what poets said about churches during the Middle Ages. That's a new avenue for research. What have you discovered from that?
Well, first I have to say, it's only through the work of the Centre for Welsh and Celtic studies that we now have text and translation, so that's crucial. But the important thing is we now know that poets looked at churches and they described the interiors, and they describe in particular, as I mentioned, this contrast between the white exterior and the painted interior. And they talk about painted woodwork a lot, especially the painted rood screen and the focus of the nave. But poets did look at wall paintings, and I think the poets admired the painters, and they admired their craft. And Sean Kent refers to the art of the image painter as magic, colour and magic, hyd a llew. So, yeah, that's an insight. And sometimes they actually describe individual paintings. So most famously, Dafydd Wiliam describes a painting of Christ and the apostles. And he describes it in great detail. And he describes the way Christ is in the centre, flanked by the apostles. He talks about the role of the apostles and the role of the passion. And so it's really, the poet is looking at the painting, looking at it in the chancel actually, and actually intellectualizing it. So people did look at paintings thoughtfully.
That's interesting, because it almost implies that the painter and the poet somehow share in the creativity of Christ, that there is a Christ-like aspect to their creativity.
I think the poets would agree with you. Yes.
And subject of humour and poetry, Richard, I was intrigued by the passage in your book that tells the story of the text painter, the self-confessed Sabbath breaker, who fell off his horse and then woke up the next day with a new talent for painting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. A verse autobiography called Mercy Triumphing Over Judgment. And it's so interesting, the medieval painters are essentially anonymous. We know a few names, but that's all. But after the Reformation, in the 17th century, painters emerge as personalities, particularly this Thomas Jones. And he describes in his autobiography how he'd had a night out, got very drunk, was on his horse, fell off his horse, and cracked his head on a stone. He was a Sabbath breaker, and he felt he should have had a judgment, but he was carried senseless into a house in Brecon. And when he recovered, he found he'd had a new talent. And this was a talent for versifying as well as painting. And he didn't know before that he had this talent. He obtained a license from the Bishop of St. David's to paint the texts on the church walls. And of course, 1604 canons or regulations of the church, of the Anglican Church, allowed chosen texts to be painted on the walls. So there was a great demand for texts to be painted on the walls. And Thomas Jones went about painting texts all over Breconshire.
And do we think we can identify texts that have survived that might have come from his hand?
Yes, there's certainly black letter texts in Breconshire that could possibly have been painted by him.
Yeah. So this is the big change really, isn't it, Richard, from the pre-Reformation, the late medieval, to the post-Reformation, that we stop pictorial art and we now focus very much on holy texts, chosen texts, as you say.
It's a fundamental change. I think you can put it like this. Before the Reformation, churches were full of colour and design. With the Reformation, around 1548, with the order from the Privy Council for the suppression of images, including whitewashing images, everything became white. And formerly, only the exterior of the church was white. Now it was all white. And images disappeared, but text replaced images. And I would say the crucial thing about this for Wales is that the 1604 canons or regulations allowed chosen text, but they didn't specify what language they were to be in. And so really, for the first time, texts in Welsh were written on the church walls. This is the first half of the 17th century. And I think you can say that written Welsh was there displayed in a public place. It had high status, and it's helped with the survival of the language in the long term.
That's quite remarkable. And Richard, I think we owe something of a debt, do we not, to John Parker, who was a 19th century antiquary who began rediscovering the colour that once filled medieval churches. He would travel around Wales. Tell us a little bit about his adventures.
Okay. I think we have to understand the immediate context. And if we read, for example, Theophilus Jones's History of Brecknock, you can see how much a lot of the clergy actually hated painted decoration, especially the folk art of the 18th century, the coats of arms and painted texts and so on. They did try and line wash these over. But it was quite clear, especially from woodwork, that surviving woodwork, medieval woodwork, was originally painted. And Reverend John Parker was an antiquary, and he started looking very closely at painted woodwork and was able to reconstruct the decorative colour schemes on rood lofts, and other examples of painted woodwork. And this was really an antiquarian exercise, but he did this in parish after parish. And he did contribute to a change in climate which saw real value in painted decoration. The church was rather split between those who liked colour and those who didn't. And it was somewhat complicated because walls were increasingly crowded with memorials, and these had kind of squeezed out the painted decoration. But he was able to show that woodwork was originally painted and that wall paintings covered the church walls. And I would say that the clergy were rather divided between those who liked decoration and those who didn't. And I think in the long run, John Parker won the day.
Oh, good. I'm rather pleased to hear that. Yes, indeed, there was a sort of battle, wasn't there, in the 19th century between the high and the low church, and in some ways we still live with that dichotomy. But it's thanks to the work of people like Jane Rutherford and conservators who've been able to recover these marvellous wall paintings in a church like this. We have a great debt to pay to her.
We do indeed. And at Llancarfan, there is still more to be discovered. And more, indeed, everywhere under the lime wash.